I'm sitting on my back deck, a steaming mug of coffee in one hand, watching a 20-year-old named Chloe point a little laser thermometer at one of my beehives. She's meticulously noting the reading on a university-branded clipboard. My suburban backyard, a humble quarter-acre of moderately well-maintained grass and a few ambitious lavender bushes, has become a bastion of academia, a frontier of entomological research. I sometimes wonder if my bees, specifically the ones in Hive Fleet Leviathan, are eligible for tenure. They've certainly put in the hours. But it wasn't always this way. This scientific sanctuary, this fortress of learning, wasn't born from a noble desire to further human knowledge. Oh no. This was forged in the fires of pure, unadulterated neighborly spite. It all started 6 months ago, with 2 beehives and a woman who had a PhD in finding things to be upset about. It began, as many questionable life choices do, with a late-night YouTube rabbit hole. 1 minute I was learning how to change the oil in my car, and 6 hours later I was watching a bearded man in overalls explain the ancient art of mead making. Mead, the nectar of the gods, Viking rocket fuel. I had to have it. But store-bought honey felt like cheating. If I was going to do this, I was going to do it right. I needed my own supply chain. I needed bees. I'm a tech guy. I work from home, wrangling code for a company that makes software to help other companies optimize their software. My life is a series of logical problems and elegant solutions. Beekeeping seemed to fit right in. It's all systems and processes, inputs and outputs. You provide the housing, they provide the honey. A simple, beautiful transaction. After a month of obsessive research and a weekend beekeeping course that was 50% practical advice and 50% dire warnings about colony collapse disorder, I was the proud owner of 2 pristine Langstroth hives. I painted them a tasteful HOA-approved forest green and set them up in the back corner of my yard, a good 50 feet from any property line. I named them the Serenity Hive, for my more placid, hard-working Italian bees, and Hive Fleet Leviathan for the other one, just because it sounded cool. My days developed a new rhythm. I'd finish my work, slip into my magnificent, astronaut-like bee suit, and go spend an hour with the girls. I'd talk to them, murmuring about my day and their progress. It was calming. The low, collective hum was the most peaceful sound in the world. My life in this quiet cul-de-sac was a model of suburban tranquility. I paid my HOA dues on time, I brought my recycling bin in the same day it was emptied, and my lawn was kept at a respectable but not intimidating height. My direct next-door neighbor, however, operated on a different level of suburban intensity. Her name was Carol. Carol's lawn wasn't just green. It was an impossible, uniform shade of emerald that suggested it was either genetically engineered or spray-painted. Her hedges were so precisely geometric they looked like they'd been rendered by a computer. We'd lived next to each other for 2 years, and our entire relationship consisted of curt, tight-lipped nods exchanged during the mad dash to our respective cars in the morning. Most of the time, I'd just see her. A fleeting shape in her kitchen window, her gaze sweeping across the neighborhood like a watchtower spotlight. She was the guardian of the cul-de-sac's beige soul, and I, it would turn out, was about to introduce a chaotic splash of black and yellow. For the first few weeks of my beekeeping adventure, she just watched. Her silence was somehow louder and more ominous than any complaint. It was the silence of a predator that has spotted its prey but is waiting for the perfect moment to strike. That moment came on a bright Saturday afternoon. I was in my full, glorious bee suit, gently puffing a smoker to calm the residents of Serenity Hive before a routine inspection. The air smelled of sweet smoke and warm wax. It was my happy place. And then a voice sliced through the peaceful hum. "Excuse me." I turned. There, standing at the absolute edge of her property line, as if an invisible force field separated our yards, was Carol. She was wearing a crisp polo shirt and khaki capris, her arms crossed so tightly she was in danger of cutting off her own circulation. "I need to talk to you about your insects." Insects. Oh, good. We were already starting with dehumanizing language. Dehumanizing, whatever. This was not going to be a friendly chat about borrowing a cup of sugar. I lifted my netted veil so she could see my face. "Hi, Carol. They're honeybees. Pretty harmless unless you happen to be a dandelion." I gave what I hoped was a disarming smile. It didn't work. "One of them flew near me," she said, her voice low and accusatory. "It was very aggressive." I paused, trying to process the sheer absurdity of the statement. "Aggressive? What did it do? Did it make a fist? Show you a tiny knife?" Her eyes narrowed. "It flew directly at my head, while I was tending to my prize-winning petunias." "Carol, with all due respect, they're bees. Flying is kind of their whole deal. They were probably just checking out your flowers. You know, pollinating. It's a public service." "I find them unsettling," she declared, as if her personal comfort level was codified in the city charter. "And they're a nuisance. The buzzing is very disruptive to my peace." I listened intently. From where we stood, 50 feet away from the hives, the only sound was a gentle breeze and a distant lawnmower. The buzzing was utterly inaudible. She wasn't just hearing bees. She was hearing the sound of something new and unapproved in her rigidly controlled environment. "I can assure you, they're perfectly safe, and I follow every city guideline," I said, my patience starting to fray. "Look, once I get the first honey harvest, I'd be happy to bring a jar over. As a peace offering." Her face curdled as if I'd offered her a jar of live hornets. "I don't want your insect secretions," she sniffed. "I want normalcy. I want them gone." She didn't wait for a reply. She turned on her heel and marched back to her house, her back ramrod straight. The conversation was over. As I watched her go, I had a sinking feeling. This wasn't about bees. This was a declaration of war, a war of attrition fought across a battlefield of perfectly manicured lawns. And Carol, I suspected, was a 5-star general of passive aggression. A week passed. A beautiful, quiet week. I started to think maybe my friendly, logical explanation had worked. Maybe Carol had seen reason. Maybe she'd Googled benefits of pollinators and had a change of heart. I was, of course, an idiot. The first salvo in Carol's war arrived not via a shout over the fence, but in a crisp, cream-colored envelope in my mailbox. It bore the crest of the Oakwood Creek Homeowners Association, a single, majestic oak tree that looked vaguely judgmental. The letter was a masterpiece of the genre. It never mentioned Carol by name, referring only to a complaint received from a concerned resident. It didn't mention bees, instead using the wonderfully vague term non-domesticated animals. It spoke of potential nuisance, liability concerns, and the preservation of neighborhood aesthetic. It was signed, cordially, the Oakwood Creek Architectural Review Committee. It was the politest, "get rid of your bees or else" I had ever read. This, however, was a battle I was prepared for. Carol had brought a strongly worded letter to a documentation fight. She had no idea who she was dealing with. That evening, fueled by coffee and righteous indignation, I crafted my reply. It was a thing of beauty. I printed out the full text of City Ordinance 114.b, Urban Apiary Regulations, and highlighted the section where I was in full compliance. I attached a colorful, friendly-looking FAQ sheet from the American Beekeeping Federation titled, "Honeybees, Your Helpful Neighborhood Heroes." I included a satellite photo of my property from Google Maps, on which I had neatly diagrammed the distance from my hives to every property line, proving I exceeded the required setback by over 20 feet. I concluded my letter with a cheerful, "I am delighted to be contributing to local biodiversity and look forward to continuing to be a responsible and compliant member of our wonderful community." I emailed the entire glorious package to the HOA board. Checkmate, or so I thought. The HOA went silent, but Carol's campaign simply shifted to a new front. The war became one of subtle, maddening annoyances. A few days after my email, a high-frequency pest repeller appeared on a stake in her yard, aimed directly at my hives, the kind designed to drive away squirrels and raccoons. It did absolutely nothing to the bees, but it drove my beagle, Buster, into a state of neurotic whining whenever he went outside. Then came the water. She began watering her prize-winning petunias with the focus and intensity of a firefighter. The sprinkler was accidentally positioned so that a steady mist drifted over the fence, creating a permanent, muddy swamp in the corner of my yard. The pièce de résistance was her phone calls. Whenever she saw me in the yard, she'd magically get an urgent call. She'd stroll along the property line, speaking just loud enough for me to hear. "Oh, absolutely, Martha. It's a real safety issue. Killer bees, I think. I just don't feel safe letting my little grandson play outside anymore. What if he gets swarmed?" I was venting about this to my friend Dave over a beer. "She's escalating," I said, pacing around my living room. "This is psychological warfare over honey-making insects. She's creating a false narrative. She's building a case." Dave took a long sip of his IPA. "Dude, you're overthinking this. You gotta fight crazy with crazy. Get a life-sized plastic alligator and put it in the mud pit she made. Get a bunch of lawn gnomes and have them all staring at her house. Install a giant fake hornet's nest on your roof." Tempting, Dave. Incredibly tempting. But no, I'm going to win this with logic and reason, I said, with a confidence I absolutely did not feel. She can't fight facts. The universe immediately decided to prove me wrong. The next morning, I found a small, laminated note attached to my fence with a zip tie. The text was printed in a stern, bold font. It read, "Your bugs are trespassing in my airspace. This is your final warning." Airspace. She was claiming sovereignty over the air above her petunias. My bees were now enemy combatants in unsanctioned airspace. Logic and reason had officially left the building. The final warning, it turned out, was not so final. The real final act of this particular drama came the following Saturday. It was a perfect, sunny morning, and I was doing a hive inspection. This is the most delicate part of beekeeping, where you gently remove the frames to check on the queen's health and the honey production. It involves smoke, slow movements, and a state of zen-like calm. A state that was about to be spectacularly shattered. I was holding up a frame, a beautiful, bustling city of thousands of bees admiring their work. And then I saw them. 2 police officers, walking up my driveway with the slow, deliberate pace of men who were 99% sure they were walking into a profoundly stupid situation. My heart hammered against my ribs. Cops. She actually called the cops. One officer was older, with a graying mustache and an air of infinite weariness. The other was younger, looking more confused than anything else. "Morning," said the older one, stopping a safe distance away. He eyed my bee suit. "Sir, we received a call about a bee emergency?" I swear he almost winced saying it. "A bee emergency?" I repeated, my voice slightly muffled by the veil. "No, officer. This is just beekeeping. It's like gardening, but with more buzzing and a cooler outfit. Everything's under control." As if on cue, a shrill voice erupted from the neighboring porch. "He's agitating them. They're going to form a killer cloud and attack." It was Carol, of course, pointing a trembling finger at me. She was standing on her porch, a phone clutched in her hand like a holy talisman. The younger officer turned to his partner, and I distinctly heard him mutter, "Did she say killer cloud?" "Sir, could you put the, bee thing down for a moment?" the older officer asked. I gently slid the frame back into the hive and closed it up. I walked towards them, pulling off my veil and gloves. "Gentlemen, my name is Leo. I can assure you, there is no killer cloud. These are Italian honeybees. They're about as aggressive as a golden retriever puppy on a mild sedative." "We have a report of a swarm," the younger officer said, consulting his notepad with an expression that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. "A swarm that was attacking, I guess?" "This isn't a swarm," I explained, gesturing to the calm, self-contained hives. "A swarm is when the queen leaves with half the colony to find a new home. This is just bees being bees in their house." Just then, Carol, growing bolder, marched to the edge of her lawn. "I saw it with my own eyes. He was wafting smoke at them, making them angry. They were pouring out of the box. It's a public menace." The older cop sighed, a deep, soulful sound that spoke of 1,000 petty disputes. He walked over to the hives, peered at the entrance for a moment where bees were calmly coming and going, then walked back. "Ma'am, they just look like they're flying around." "It's a violation," she insisted, "of my safety, my peace of mind." "Sir, do you have the proper permits for these?" the officer asked me, his tone shifting to one of procedural box checking. My moment had come. I reached into my pocket and produced a neatly folded copy of my city apiary registration. I handed it to him. He unfolded it, read it, and handed it back. He then turned to Carol. "Ma'am, the homeowner is fully compliant with all city ordinances. There's no swarm, no danger, and no law being broken. This is not a police matter." But my airspace," she sputtered, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. The younger officer's eyebrows shot up. The older one just looked at her, his expression unchanging. "This is a civil dispute between you and your neighbor," he said, his voice flat. "Please do not call 911 unless there is an actual life-threatening emergency." He gave me a final look. It was a complex expression, a mixture of pity, understanding, and a silent plea for me to not be the reason he had to come back here. Then they turned and walked back to their patrol car. I stood there, adrenaline souring in my stomach. The humiliation of having the police called on me for my hobby, the sheer, breathtaking irrationality of it all. I looked at the hives, my peaceful little hobby that had somehow become a police matter. I looked at Carol, who was staring at me with pure, undiluted hatred before storming back into her house. That was it. That was the breaking point. Logic had failed. Reason had failed. Even the law, in the form of 2 bemused police officers, had failed to stop her. She wouldn't be beaten by reason. She had to be beaten by rules. My rules were not enough. I needed bigger, better, more intimidating rules. I needed a shield so powerful, so bureaucratic, so utterly final that her complaints would bounce off it like pebbles off a battleship. I went inside, my mind racing. The war was no longer about defense. It was time to go on the offensive. That night, sleep was a distant country I couldn't get a visa for. I sat in the blue glow of my monitor, Buster the Beagle snoring softly at my feet, and I let my frustration guide my fingers across the keyboard. My Google search history from that night would have looked like the manifesto of a deeply unhinged suburbanite. How to deal with irrational neighbors legally. Most petty but effective neighbor revenge. Can you sue someone for being annoying? Oakwood Creek HOA bylaws loophole non-domesticated animals. Legal definition of airspace over private property. I was spiraling. I was imagining elaborate Rube Goldberg-esque contraptions to fling water balloons at her petunias. I was fantasizing about training my bees to spell out chill in perfect formation. It was a dark time. Dejected, I clicked away from the forums filled with bad advice and started looking at official websites again, thinking maybe I'd missed some obscure ordinance. I ended up on the state's Agricultural Extension website, a clunky, text-heavy relic from the early 2000s. I was about to give up when I saw a link in a sidebar. Pollinator Resources. I clicked. That led me to another page with a link to the State University's entomology department. The university's website was a different world. It was sleek, professional, and full of pictures of smiling students holding butterfly nets. I scrolled through articles about monarch migration and the fascinating life cycle of the dung beetle. And then I saw it. A headline that stopped my frantic clicking cold. Citizen Science Initiative. Partner with us to study urban pollinators. I read the article with the intensity of a scholar deciphering an ancient text. The department was running a long-term study on the health of bee populations in suburban environments. They were looking for volunteer homeowners to provide stable, long-term study sites. These sites would host monitoring equipment and allow researchers access to collect data on both native bees and honeybees. Volunteers were expected to maintain a pesticide-free environment, and that was it. A thought, a tiny glowing ember sparked in the dark, petty corner of my mind. It started as a what if, and rapidly grew into a blazing inferno of malicious compliance. My internal monologue went into overdrive. What if my yard wasn't just my yard? What if it was research? Official, university-sanctioned research. You can't argue with research. You can't file an HOA complaint against science. Carol wouldn't be complaining about my hobby anymore. She would be interfering with a legitimate scientific study. She wouldn't be fighting me. She'd be fighting the entire state university system. Oh my God. It's perfect. It's beautiful. It's the most gloriously passive-aggressive, legally ironclad idea I've ever had. My fingers flew across the keyboard, a manic grin spreading across my face. I opened a new email. The To field addressed to the contact listed on the webpage. Subject, Inquiry, Potential Urban Pollinator Study Site. Dear Dr. Alistair Finch, my name is Leo Garrison, and I am a resident of Oakwood Creek. I am writing to you today after reading about your fantastic citizen science initiative on the university's website. I am the steward of a thriving suburban micro-habitat featuring a diverse collection of native flowering plants. I glanced out the window at my dandelions and the 3 lavender bushes, and a completely pesticide-free environment. Furthermore, I am a dedicated apiarist, currently managing 2 healthy hives of Apis mellifera. My property would be an ideal location to study the interaction between managed honeybees and native pollinators. I would be honored to offer my property as a long-term pro bono study site for your department's vital research. Please let me know what the next steps would be. Sincerely, Leo Garrison, concerned citizen and pollinator enthusiast. I read it over once, twice. It was perfect. It was professional, enthusiastic, and contained just the right amount of exaggerated ecological grandeur. With a triumphant click, I hit send. The first shot in the academic arms race had been fired. I finally went to bed, sleeping the deep, peaceful sleep of a man who has found a truly elegant solution to his problems. I honestly didn't expect a quick reply. I figured my email would languish in a dusty corner of a university server, read once and then forgotten. So, when a notification popped up the very next afternoon with the subject line, Re-Inquiry Potential Urban Pollinator Study Site, my heart did a little leap. It wasn't from Dr. Finch, the department head, but from a Dr. Anya Sharma. The email was brief and professional. She was a postdoctoral researcher managing the Citizen Science Project. She found my proposal intriguing and asked if I was available for a short video call the next day to discuss the viability of the site. The next afternoon, I sat in front of my webcam, wearing my nicest collared shirt and having strategically shoved all the junk in my home office just out of frame. When Anya's face appeared on the screen, she looked exactly how I pictured a serious, overworked academic. She had sharp, intelligent eyes, hair pulled back in a practical bun, and a slightly tired expression that suggested she was fueled by pure caffeine and grant proposal anxiety. "Mr. Garrison, I'm Dr. Sharma. Thank you for your interest in our program." "Dr. Sharma, please, call me Leo, and thank you for your time. I'm a huge admirer of the work your department does." A little flattery couldn't hurt. She gave a curt nod, unimpressed. "So, your email mentioned a thriving suburban micro-habitat. Could you elaborate on the existing flora?" I launched into my carefully rehearsed speech. "Of course, we have a robust presence of Taraxacum officinale, dandelions, which provides an excellent early-season food source, a significant planting of Lavandula angustifolia, lavender, and a smattering of wild Trifolium repens, clover." I was basically just listing my most prominent weeds using their Latin names. Anya raised an eyebrow. "I see. And you maintain 2 hives. What's your mite management protocol? Are you using Apivar strips? Formic acid?" She was testing me. This was an interview. "I use a formic acid pro treatment in the late summer and an oxalic acid vaporization in the winter. My last mite count was well below the threshold," I said, rattling off the information I'd memorized from beekeeping forums. She seemed mildly surprised. "Okay, good. Now, Mr. Leo, our program is primarily focused on gathering data to support conservation efforts. What is your primary motivation for wanting to turn your yard into a study site?" This was it, the moment of truth. I looked her dead in the eye, through the webcam, and delivered the most sincere-sounding lie I could muster. "Dr. Sharma, my primary motivation is to contribute to our collective understanding of urban pollinator decline. The bombus impatiens, the common eastern bumblebee, which I had Googled 10 minutes before the call, is of particular concern to me. I believe in fostering a spirit of academic inquiry and community engagement right here in a residential setting." I paused for dramatic effect, then leaned in slightly. "And also, my neighbor is an absolute nightmare who keeps calling the cops on my bees. And I have a theory that she can't file an HOA complaint against a university-sanctioned scientific study." Anya stared at me, her professional mask cracking for the first time. A long silence stretched out. I thought I'd blown it. Then the corner of her mouth twitched. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was in the same zip code. "I see," she said slowly. "Our department has a very limited budget for site maintenance." "No budget needed," I jumped in. "I will maintain everything. I will cover all costs for any necessary upgrades. Consider it a philanthropic donation of land use. For science. And you know, for spite." Another long pause. She looked away from the camera, thinking. I could almost hear the gears turning. On one hand, my motivation was absurdly petty. On the other hand, I was a knowledgeable beekeeper offering a perfectly suitable, no-cost, long-term study site in a desirable demographic area. Her scientific pragmatism was at war with her judgment of my character. Pragmatism won. "All right, Leo," she said, a note of resignation in her voice. "I'll email you some paperwork. A memorandum of understanding between you and the university. If you sign it, I'll add you to our site roster. We can have an intern come out for the first data collection in a couple of weeks, and I'll mail you the official site marker." "The official site marker?" I asked, barely able to contain my glee. "Yes," she sighed. "A sign. It's a 2 by 3 foot, all-weather sign that designates the area as a protected research site. It was more beautiful than I ever could have imagined. "Dr. Sharma," I said, my voice thick with genuine emotion, "I won't let you down. This is going to be a very, very productive partnership." 2 weeks later, a large, flat box with the university's logo on it arrived at my doorstep. I brought it inside with the reverence usually reserved for the Ark of the Covenant. Buster the Beagle sniffed it suspiciously, no doubt sensing the sheer magnitude of the bureaucratic power contained within. I opened it on my kitchen table. Inside, nestled in packing paper, was my arsenal. First, there was the Memorandum of Understanding. It was 5 pages of dense legalese, full of clauses about data ownership and liability waivers. I read every word with a growing sense of triumph before signing my name at the bottom with a flourish. I immediately framed it. Next were a few pieces of research equipment. A small wooden bee hotel for attracting native solitary bees, and a rain gauge with a university logo on it. I would install these with an almost religious solemnity. And then, at the bottom of the box, was the crown jewel. The sign. It was even more magnificent in person. Made of thick, durable PVC, the background was a serious academic forest green. In stark white, official-looking font, it read, "Warning. Ecological Study Area. University Pollinator Research in Progress. Do not disturb. Department of Entomology." It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. It was a shield, a sword, and a declaration of victory all in one. But a sign this glorious couldn't just be propped up on a flimsy stake. It needed to be installed with authority. It needed to look permanent, immovable, and, above all, official. This required professionals. I looked up local fencing and landscaping companies and made a call. The next day, a grizzled-looking man in a dusty pickup truck pulled into my driveway. His name was Gus, and his face looked like it had been carved out of granite and left in the sun for 60 years. I walked him to the back, to the property line I shared with Carol. "So, here's the project," I said, trying to sound as normal as possible. "I need a simple 4-foot cedar fence installed right along here. Standard stuff. But the most important part is this." I showed him the sign. "I need a post, a really solid one installed right here, and I want this sign mounted on it. The post needs to be sunk in concrete. I want it to be able to withstand a hurricane. This sign is very important." Gus took the sign from me, his calloused hands turning it over. He squinted at the text. "Pollinator Study Area, huh?" He looked from the sign to my beehives, then back to my face. "You a professor or something?" "I'm a private research partner," I said, puffing out my chest slightly. "An official affiliate of the university." Gus grunted. He'd clearly seen his share of weirdos with weird backyard projects. "Whatever you say, pal, it's your money." He took a few measurements, scribbled a number on a carbon copy form, and handed it to me. "We can get it done next Tuesday." "Tuesday is perfect," I said, signing the form. As Gus walked back to his truck, he shook his head slowly, a small, bewildered smile on his face. I didn't care. Let him think I was eccentric. He was just a contractor. He didn't understand that he wasn't just installing a signpost. He was planting a flag. He was building my fortress. The anticipation for Tuesday was electric. I felt like a general on the eve of a great, silent, suburban battle. Tuesday arrived, bright and clear, with the kind of crisp air that feels full of possibility. Gus and his 2-man crew rolled up at 8 a.m. sharp, their truck laden with cedar planks and bags of concrete. The sounds of their work, the rhythmic thud of the post-hole digger, the whine of a circular saw, was music to my ears. It was the soundtrack to my impending victory. I made them a pitcher of lemonade, feeling like a benevolent king overseeing the construction of his castle walls. I was in my home office, pretending to work, but my eyes were glued to the window, watching the scene unfold. They set the fence posts first. Then, they moved to the main event. They dug a deep, perfectly cylindrical hole right on the property line, directly in the line of sight from Carol's kitchen window. It was a strategic placement of the highest order. Just as they were mixing the concrete, it happened. Like a groundhog sensing a change in the weather, Carol's back door slid open. She emerged onto her patio, a mug in her hand, her face already pinched in its default state of disapproval. She saw the construction, and her eyes narrowed. She saw the sign leaning against my house, and her face went from disapproving to furious. She set her mug down with a sharp clink and began her march across the lawn. This was it, the final showdown. She didn't even bother to look at me. She went straight for the man in charge. "Excuse me," she barked at Gus, who was leveling the thick wooden post in the hole. "What do you think you're doing? You can't install a commercial sign here. This is a residential area. It's against the bylaws." Gus, to his credit, didn't even flinch. He slowly straightened up, wiping a line of sweat from his brow with the back of a dusty glove. "Ma'am, I'm just a contractor. I put things where the homeowner tells me to put them. The homeowner is right over there." He hooked a thumb in my direction. Carol pivoted, her eyes blazing with righteous HOA fury. "Leo, what is the meaning of this? I am calling the HOA board right now. This is the last straw." I took a deep breath and walked calmly out onto my deck, clipboard in hand. On the clipboard was my framed memorandum of understanding. I had also put on a plain navy blue polo shirt, onto which I had ironed a small, tasteful university logo I'd printed on transfer paper the night before. I had to look the part. "Carol, please, keep your voice down," I said, my voice dripping with calm authority. "You're disturbing a designated research area." Her mouth, which had been open to unleash another volley of outrage, snapped shut. Her eyes darted from me to the sign, which one of Gus's crew was now bolting to the freshly concreted post. I descended the deck stairs and approached her, stopping at a polite distance. I held up the clipboard. "As you can see," I said, pointing to the official university letterhead, "this property is now an official partner in the State University's ongoing Pollinator population study. My bees are no longer a hobby, Carol. They are research assets." I let that sink in. Her face was a kaleidoscope of confusion. "Tampering with them," I continued, my voice steady and clear, "or this sign, or interfering in any way with the official research being conducted here by university personnel is a serious issue. I'm sure we'd all hate for the university's legal department to get involved. They can be so bureaucratic." She snatched the clipboard from my hand. Her eyes scanned the document, flying across words like entomology, longitudinal study, and official site designation. She saw the university crest. She saw the signature of Dr. Anya Sharma, Ph.D. She looked at the giant, official, professionally installed sign. She looked back at my smug, polo-shirted face. Her brain, which ran on the simple fuel of HOA bylaws and neighborhood gossip, could not compute this new data. This was an outside context problem. There was no clause in the bylaws for dealing with a neighbor who weaponizes academia. The fury on her face collapsed, replaced by a wave of slack-jawed disbelief. All the fight, all the righteous indignation just evaporated. She couldn't argue with a university. That was an institution, a pillar of society. It was like trying to issue a noise complaint against a public library. She sputtered. A few meaningless sounds escaped her lips. "But you can't, it's—" She couldn't finish. She was beaten. She shoved the clipboard back at my chest, turned a shade of deep crimson I had previously only seen on her prize-winning petunias, and retreated. She didn't march. She didn't stomp. She scurried back into her house, and the sliding door closed behind her with a soft little click. Silence descended upon the backyard, broken only by the gentle hum of the bees. Gus and his crew, who had stopped working to watch the entire drama unfold, were staring at me. Gus slowly shook his head, a grin spreading across his face. "Buddy," he said, letting out a low whistle. "I've been doing this for 30 years. I've seen folks build spite fences. I've seen them install fountains just to drown out their neighbor's dog. But I ain't ever seen somebody shut down a nosy neighbor with a university partnership." He chuckled. "That's a new one. Tell you what, I'm not even going to charge you extra for the entertainment." Life in the newly christened Oakwood Creek Pollinator study area was peaceful. Gloriously, wonderfully peaceful. The change was immediate and total. It was as if the sign projected a 500-foot radius field of pure, unadulterated, "Leave me alone." A few weeks later, the research officially began. A cheerful, impossibly enthusiastic biology undergraduate named Chloe showed up, clipboard in hand. She was the student intern Anya had mentioned. She had absolutely no idea about the suburban Cold War that had led to her standing in my backyard. She just really, really loved bees. "Oh, wow!" she exclaimed, looking at my hives. "This is a fantastic setup, Mr. Garrison. Your landing boards have excellent traffic. And is that a wild bee hotel? That's perfect for observing native species." "Please, call me Leo," I said, leaning against my fence with a newfound sense of scholarly gravitas. And yes, I felt it was crucial to support the local solitary bee population as well, for the integrity of the data. Chloe nodded eagerly, scribbling notes. "Absolutely. The interaction between the managed Apis mellifera and the local Megachilidae is a key focus of Dr. Sharma's work." Her visits became a monthly routine. She'd count bees, measure pollen samples, and ask me earnest questions about nectar flow, all while I nodded sagely and tried to sound like I hadn't learned everything I knew from YouTube videos and a desperate need to annoy Carol. The neighborhood buzz, pun intended, was entirely different now. The other neighbors, who had previously regarded me with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion, now saw the sign and were intrigued. A guy from down the street, Bob, stopped me while I was getting the mail. "Hey, Leo, saw the sign," he said, impressed. "A university study, huh? That's pretty cool. My wife and I were thinking of planting a butterfly bush. You think that would, help your study?" I had become the Neil deGrasse Tyson of the cul-de-sac, the interesting, intellectual guy contributing to a noble cause, not the weirdo with the insect boxes. I gave Bob some pointers on pollinator-friendly plants and felt a ridiculous surge of pride. But the most profound change was the silence, the deafening, beautiful silence from next door. Carol was a ghost. Her high-frequency pest repeller vanished. The lawn sprinkler was recalibrated to water only her lawn. There were no more passive-aggressive phone calls, no more laminated notes. If I was in my yard and she came outside, she would immediately turn and go back in, as if the sight of my scientific sanctuary was physically painful to her. One afternoon, I was out weeding a new patch of coneflowers I'd planted, for the research, of course. I saw her face in her kitchen window, staring out at my yard, at the hives, at the sign. Her expression wasn't angry anymore. It was just defeated. The war was over, and I had won without ever raising my voice or breaking a single rule. I had achieved total suburban dominance through the clever application of paperwork. And so, we come full circle. I'm back on my deck, the late afternoon sun warming my face. Chloe, the ever-enthusiastic intern, left about an hour ago after her monthly data collection, leaving behind the pleasant, lingering feeling of scientific legitimacy. In my hand is not a mug of coffee this time, but a short glass containing 2 fingers of amber liquid over ice. It's mead, My first successful batch, made with the first honey harvested since my yard became a field office for the university. I swirl the glass, watching the light catch the golden hues. It smells of honey and flowers, and a hint of something else. Something deeply satisfying. It smells like victory. I took a risk. I gambled that the only thing more powerful than a petty, irrational neighbor was an even more powerful, unassailable bureaucracy. I called Carol's bluff and raised her a full-blown academic partnership. I didn't just build a fence, I built a fortress of officialdom around my hobby, and it worked better than I ever could have dreamed. I didn't break a single HOA rule. I just found a bigger, better set of rules to live by. The funny thing is, my yard actually is better now. I've planted more native flowers. I've learned more about the local ecosystem. I'm an active, if accidental, contributor to a real scientific study. I won the war, and as a spoil of that victory, I accidentally became a better environmentalist. I take a sip of the mead. It's sweet, potent, and smooth. As I lower the glass, my eyes drift over to Carol's house. And there she is, a silhouette in her kitchen window, watching me. The guardian of the cul-de-sac, watching the eccentric scientist next door enjoy the fruits of his research. I can't help myself. I raise my glass in her direction, a silent, magnanimous toast across the manicured battlefield. To Carol, the unlikely, unwilling patron of my little scientific endeavor. They say you can catch more flies with honey than with vinegar. But as it turns out, the best way to deal with a Karen is with a laminated sign and the full backing of the state university system. And that, my friends, is a victory that tastes even sweeter than the honey.